समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
It's not even 3 weeks from the ceasefire in Operation Sindoor, and effectively, the operation is in abeyance. It has not been called off. It's not been withdrawn. That is something that the Prime Minister and all the key ministers in this government and officials have been saying all this while. So we are still in that situation, and we are talking about this. In this situation, some very interesting words have been spoken. So I will mention to you two very briefly that the Prime Minister has spoken in the order of precedence, and then the Raksha Mantri has spoken today. Prime Minister 2 days back in Bikaner in his opening speech, as when he started this blitz going from place to place, Rajasthan, Gujarat onwards, then West Bengal. He was supposed to be in Sikkim but could not go because of weather. So one thing he said is a good takeaway, and then something that Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh said today at the CII opener, and then we'll hold forth for some time in some detail on what the Air Chief Marshal Amar Preet Singh said. The Navy Chief also spoke there. The Army Chief was not present. He had a prior commitment, so he could not attend. It was unusual and quite a pleasant surprise that CII had invited the three chiefs. The Vice Chief, the Army Vice Chief, represented the chief there. Some significant points emerged from what the Air Chief said, Air Chief Marshal Amar Preet Singh. So first of all, the Prime Minister speaking at Bikaner, and this is just one line in a long speech, and he said, and I am translating from his website, he says, now India has made it clear that Pakistan will have to pay a heavy price for every terrorist act. And then he says, and this price will be paid by Pakistan's army and Pakistan's economy. इसका ये कीमत पाकिस्तान के सेना को भी चुकानी पड़ेगी और पाकिस्तान की अर्थव्यवस्था को भी. Now, what does it mean? You can only read between the lines. You know that the Prime Minister is given to his flourishes, but he also makes his flourishes either with a political objective in mind or for strategic signaling, and also part of the strategic signaling is creating space for himself. So is India going to do the same thing every time there is a terror attack? Because knowing the history with Pakistan, this can happen anytime again. Will you again do the same thing? What will be the target? So he's probably giving himself more options. He's creating more options, that the payback can be military, payback can be economic, payback can be both. So that is a significant line. पाकिस्तान की सेनाएं और पाकिस्तान की अर्थव्यवस्था दोनों को उसका खामियाजा भुगतना पड़ेगा. Both will have to pay for it. Both will have to pay the price for it. That I thought was an important thing for us to highlight. Again, there are hazards to reading between the lines, but it's our profession to read between the lines. In any case, I'm not drawing any conclusions. I'm just putting it forward to you. This is the one substantive highlight out of all the other rhetoric and flourishes that he has made, a lot of it appealing to his voter base as well. That's one. The second, Rajnath Singh, the defense minister, at CII today, speaking in Hindi. In fact, he started out saying, I think he spoke the first line in English, then he said, I will speak in Hindi, and then he said, maybe in English. It was more in Hindi because he's very good in Hindi, and he is very measured with what he says. So once again, besides whatever else he said, because this was a very significant outreach, because CII is the Confederation of Indian Industry. This is the premier, sorry Fiki, no offense meant to you, but this is the largest body of Indian industry and Indian entrepreneurs. Their annual event was due on the 9th of May, but they postponed it because of the developments. It's been held now. And the theme in so many ways has become defense and defense manufacture. And that's why they had Rajnath Singh as their opening speaker, like the chief speaker. And then the three armed forces were present. Two had their chiefs there and one had the vice chief there. So that was a significant moment because this is the most structured outreach by the government, by the Ministry of Defense to Indian private sector and also by the Indian private sector to the government. Lately, we have seen that Modi government has decided to end the monopoly of the defense PSUs on defense manufacture, and they are going to make them face competition from Indian domestic manufacturers as well as foreign manufacturers, because 100% FDI is allowed in defense manufacture now. We've seen lately that for artillery guns, orders have been given to the Kalyani Group, Bharat Forge, orders have been given to Larsen and Toubro. Many of the others also, Tatas have got orders. There is a joint venture to make C-295 aircraft. So there is now an opening out of defense production to the private sector. And that's why this heavy defense presence was very significant and should not be missed. So what did Rajnath Singh say? As I told you, he's a very cautious speaker. However, he spoke about POK, Pakistan Occupied Kashmir. Now we know that there is a great clamor in the BJP support base to get POK back. After all, it is a part of India. It's a part of India's map. Constitutionally, it's a part of India. And there are two resolutions of Parliament unanimously committing India to getting Pakistan Occupied Kashmir back. Rajnath Singh spoke about that and added a nuance there. He said that who are the people of POK? People of POK are our brothers. तो हमारे भाई हैं, मेरा ही भाई है वो, मेरे ही भाई हैं वो. And he says in the course of time, he says for now, भौगोलिक दूर से और राजनीतिक दूर से, that is geographically and politically, there is a distance between them and us. But they are our own people and inevitably they will come back to us. Then he says, explaining how he thinks they will come back to us, he says, उनकी हमारे साथ एकजुटता. That means they return to India's fold. They return to India's fold where they belong. There are Indians after all. There are Indian brothers after all. That depends on वो एकजुटता भारत के आर्थिक, सामाजिक और सांस्कृतिक समृद्धि के ऊपर निर्भर करती है. What he's trying to say is that if India's economy grows that much, if India's society stays coherent, if India's society stays cohesive, and also if culturally India's riches also rise, I think what it means is diversity also rises and the faith in that rises, then these brethren of ours will say, why are we living as some other entity, some alien entity? We should become part of India again. So he's conscious that it is Maharana Pratap's Jayanti. So it takes you back to the history of the disagreement between Maharana Pratap and his brother Shakti Singh, who had left him and gone to the other side. And he quotes Maharana Pratap as saying that, look, after all, he's my brother. One day he will leave the wrong path that he's on and he'll come back on my path. And that is what ultimately happened. मेरा ही भाई है, मुझसे दूर कहाँ जाएगा? That's a line he quotes from Maharana Pratap. And then he says, ultimately, people in POK will also say, मैं भारत का ही हूँ, मैं भारतीय हूँ, मैं वापस आ जाऊँगा और मैं वापस आ गया हूँ. So that again is something where you can read between the lines, but it's the first time I have heard a really serious and senior BJP leader expressing the view that if India grows, India prospers, India stays peaceful, India stays welcoming, then the people of POK themselves will want a return to India instead of India having to use armed forces to do that. That's a very new formulation, particularly for the BJP. However, he goes on to say that we hit the Pakistanis everywhere, from the lowermost part of Pakistan, that's the south, to the northernmost, as in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So these are the two important political insights that we have for you. Then we come to Air Chief Marshal AP Singh, who will get the headlines. When you open the newspapers, he will get the headlines. It's a 13-minute speech. I think each chief was allowed 9 minutes. He complained in the very beginning that I was promised my cup of coffee, that hasn't come, right? And then as he spoke, a couple of times he referred to that also, coffee thandi ho jayegi and all that. But he spoke for 30 minutes. This was a very interesting 30 minutes. What did he say? I'm summarizing. I'm also taking out some highlights and giving you some interpretation of these. He said, Op Sindoor has shown where we are headed and what to expect in the future. That means it was India's first futuristic battle. Futuristic battle means a modern battle. It was short, but modern battle between the most high-tech resources from both sides. In this case, much more between the two air forces. And then he celebrates the fact that private sector is now getting involved. That's because he's speaking to the private sector. And he says we have to grow faith in our own industry, and I will come to that in a couple of minutes. He emphasizes, however, the primacy of air power. He says India is a seafaring nation. India needs a very strong navy, but you know, whether it's the navy or it's the army, everybody needs air power. So air power is central to all force projection and all force expression. My words, not his. That air power is central to all of this. So he said, while there should be a very strong air force, air power is needed for all dimensions of warfare. Nothing can work without air power. Then he says India now has to come to a situation where it can design and develop its own weapon systems and also produce them in numbers, because that is where capacity becomes critical. And he says there should be trust between the armed forces and industry. Once a commitment is made, the commitment must be kept. And he quotes from Rajnath Singh and he quotes from Raksha Mantri who had spoken earlier, Pran jaye par vachan na jaye. That means once you make a commitment, that commitment must be kept at any cost. And then he uses a line which comes from a Salman Khan movie, a famous Salman Khan line. He says, "मैं जब commitment दे देता हूँ, फिर मैं अपनी भी नहीं सुनता." And there is a reason why he's talking so much about this commitment business, to which we will come in about 2 minutes. He says, I'm not saying we've come this far on our own. There was a rap on the knuckles which made us look inwards, think inwards, and now that we are ready for the change, we have seen that Atmanirbharta, there is no option to Atmanirbharta. That's the only solution. And in next 10 years, that is the direction we have to go on to now. I checked with Snehesh Alex Philip what is rap on the knuckles means, and it's probably referring to the 2016 event when the Air Force was hesitant to order Tejas aircraft or Tejas Mark 1, 1A, etc. The Air Force would have liked to focus on going ahead with MMRCA contract. That was the plan, to buy 126 copies of medium multi-role combat aircraft. That's why MMRCA. That wasn't moving, and the Air Force was probably worried that if they have to commit money to Tejas in its earlier editions, in its earlier iterations, it will, one, not fulfill the role for which they wanted it. Second, it will delay the MMRCA contract. However, the story is that Manohar Parrikar, who was then Defense Minister, he was tough with the Air Force. That probably is the rap on the knuckles, and the Air Force made a commitment to Tejas. However, the Tejas project is now delayed. Mark 1 numbers took too long coming in. Mark 1A is delayed now for many reasons. Mark 2 is not even in the prototype version right now, and that is where the impatience is coming from. Now, the chief said we have to be now ready for the future. But yes, while we have to be ready for the future, but also for today. Future is a concern, but what is required today is required today. Now, once again, you can make your own interpretation of that, but I think what he's trying to say is that there is a shortage of squadrons right now, which has to be addressed not in the future, but it has to be addressed now. In the future, new technologies, new replacements, the next generation aircraft, etc. will come. But the shortfalls right now have to be addressed right now. He's not saying it, I'm interpreting it. And I think he's also hinting that this could be done and Make in India programs like that. Again, I'm saying this, he's not saying this, could also be joint ventures with any of the other manufacturers with whom you might be talking. So these new aircraft could come in to fill up, one, the falling squadron numbers, and also to replace the existing aircraft in some squadron numbers that are still operational, but where the aircraft have become really obsolete. And that is something that this 3-day combat has shown, because in today's air warfare, anything that's not adequately equipped for beyond visual range environment will have its limitations. Let me leave it at that. I'm saying that he's not saying that. He said that this has to be done on the basis of the whole of nation working on mission mode. He says, addressing the private industry, he says you make profits, but in Punjabis will know there's a concept. It's actually a very good concept in Sikhism, that if you earn 100 rupees, if your profit is 100 rupees, you allocate 10 rupees to the larger common good, of society. So he's asking private industry that you make profits, can you invest 10% of this on research and development? Speaking at the same event, Samir B. Kamath, the head of DRDO, who has just got 1 more year's extension, he said that India has been spending not enough on defense research, and so far it's just been about 5% of the defense budget. And he said that the defense minister has assured him that over the next 5 years, this 5% will become 10%. Obviously, defense budget will also be increasing going ahead. Air Chief then goes on to say that we need to retain our best people to do defense research. Many of them leave. We need to retain them, for which we need a good environment where they can prosper, but also incentives for them to work. Why I told you he stressed so much on the commitment aspect. He says, sometimes while signing a contract, we are sure that this will not come on time. Abhi sign karte hain, and then he says, his words, not mine, uske baad dekhenge kya karna hai. Then we'll see what to do. The process gets vitiated. His words. He says the process gets vitiated. He said, we are not calling a black sheep. Hum bhi Sanyam dikhate hain, because Sanyam, patience, is an expression that Rajnath Singh had used. So referring to that, he says, hum bhi Sanyam dikhate hain. By not calling a black sheep, we've been encouraging people, but somewhere it will break down. What he's doing is, he's using the analogy of a plastic band, right? That you stretch it at least to a point where it doesn't break down. But if you stretch it too much, it will break down. And then he picks up a line from Winston Churchill. He abridges it a little bit by about 5 words. What I can do for you is, I can read the entire line for you. It's a famous Churchill line. And the line is, to each there comes in their lifetimes a special moment when they are figuratively tapped on the shoulder and offered the chance to do a very special thing, unique to them and fitted to their talents. What a tragedy if that moment finds them unprepared or unqualified for that which could have been their finest hour. This is Winston Churchill's finest hour speech, the famous finest hour speech. And he says, you guys make the best cars in the world, you guys make the best electronics, best other goods. Why don't you focus a little bit more on defense? Because what's happening right now, the big change in India's defense right now is the opening up. It's the opening up to the private sector. That is epochal, because sometimes we underestimate. We look at many other areas of reform, but we underestimate some of the more difficult stuff that's been done. Now, defense industry in India, there were 2 kinds of defense industry. One was defense PSUs, that's HAL, BDL, Bharat Dynamics, which makes most of India's missiles, or BHEL, or Bharat Electronics, BEL, BHEL, etc., etc. There are many of these defense PSUs. At the same time, a lot of the military and defense manufacture in India, particularly ammunition, was done by Ordnance Factories Board. These were like departments of the government. These were not even corporatized. So 2 reforms have taken place under the Modi government. One, the Ordnance Factory Boards have been corporatized. Now they are companies. Now if the armed forces need a particular ammunition, they might have to face competitive bids from private manufacturers. Plus, they have balance sheets, they are companies, they are held to their profit and loss, their management, their CEOs are held to their P&L accounts. Earlier, they were just departments of the government The budget was paying for everything. That's one sizable reform. The other sizable reform is taking place now lately, where the private sector is being allowed to bid for defense contracts. What that means is that these defense PSUs, which had got so used to being monopolies, now I always say this, that all monopolies are bad, but the government monopolies are the worst among them. Remember the state of our banking before private banks came in. After the private banks came in, many of the nationalized banks actually improved. If you look at State Bank of India, it is I call it the most improved. It's the largest, the oldest, and yet the most improved public sector bank in India because they saw competition. So many improved, many did not improve, and then suffered in the process. MTNL, BSNL, for example. Now, similar kind of competition defense PSUs will face. So once again, I said all monopolies are bad and state monopolies, government monopolies are the worst. But think of government monopolies, state monopolies, which also have one captive customer. And that captive customer can't go anywhere else. What kind of price negotiations take place between them? I don't know. Now, for that customer also, Army, Navy, Air Force in this case, now there will be options. But and even for price negotiations, because ultimately it's all going out of their very limited, tight budget. They will have options, and plus the biggest pain of non-delivery on time. Once you have these other nifty companies promising delivery on time and maybe delivering on time, that will make some defense PSUs much smarter as well. HAL, for example, is a great company. It's one of the great aviation companies in the world, but it has monopoly and it has only one customer. One means not just the Air Force, but Army, Navy, Air Force. That is changing now, and Op Sindoor and its lessons are going to provide impetus to it. Because if we go back to being lazy once again, then this will be one more great opportunity lost. However, listening to what we've been listening to over the past several days and also reading what we've been reading, this doesn't look like this opportunity will be lost so easily now. The private sector is now being fully amalgamated in defense military manufacturing, and this will lead to the rise of a genuine Indian military industrial complex.